I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I don't have a prop except this, just a letter from the State Corporation Commission. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, last week we heard from the gentleman from Powhatan, Delegate Ware, about a bipartisan letter that was sent to the State Corporation Commission to request an analysis of a number of the bills that are now heading towards us related to changes in the so-called rate freeze bill of several years ago. And fortunately, the State Corporation Commission responded just this Monday with a letter of their own, and I would commend all of you to take a look at that letter because it does address some of the concerns that a number of us have about these rate freeze bills. I want to refresh your recollection that this letter was a bipartisan letter sent from both sides of the aisle, and I rise today not as the minority leader, as the Democratic leader of the House, but just as a delegate trying to do his or her job. And that's a job that we're all going to have to do with this new utility rate regulation that's going to be before us. So this is a bipartisan letter, bipartisan concerns. The other thing I want to emphasize to people is that there are very different reasons why folks in this body might have supported the rate freeze bill of several years ago. I will not characterize that bill in a negative light, but I will say it didn't necessarily work the way we hoped it would have. I don't want to spend a lot of time dwelling on something that was done in the past, but instead focus on something we can do in the future. And so with that in mind, I want to draw the attention of the body to several of the highlights of the SCC letter. And in it, the first highlight, it says, and I quote, under these bills, there will be no opportunity to consider base rate reductions or refunds to customers for at least 6 years, and then only if the utility over-earns for 2 consecutive 3-year periods. And they say this effectively extends the current base rate freeze further into the future. And that's important because if you're concerned about the base rate bill in 2015, you better be concerned about these bills that we're seeing now because it extends the rate freeze. And in fact, some would argue that the bills before us now are worse than the 2015 rate freeze bill. Now, I might say as well that these bills will be changed. And in fact, as the delegate from Scott told me this morning, the bills are being changed. The SCC is reacting to the bills that were before them. So let's acknowledge that there will be changes. And of course, there have got to be changes because these bills have to be approved upon. Now, another important point here is where they say that the amount that appears to represent the customer's portion of prior excess earnings has not been examined in any formal proceeding to determine its accuracy. Now, why is that important? In the bill, I think there is a number, $133 million, that would go back to ratepayers, your and my constituents. The SCC is saying that number might not be right. And the only way to find out is to have some kind of proceeding to determine whether that figure is right. And you know, there are a lot of numbers that are floating around this chamber about whether it's 200 million, 300 million, 400 million. We frankly don't know, and we're not going to know unless somebody takes a really close look at the bill. And then here's the real kicker. The question was raised of whether base rates can be reduced if the Commission determines that the electric utility is over-earned. The answer is interesting. The earliest date that APCO customers' rates could be reduced would be in 2024. The earliest rate the Dominion customers' rates could be reduced under the bills that were introduced would be 2025. Now, I don't know whether you want to write that in a letter to your constituents, but I would submit to you that that might not be the greatest thing to do. These bills have to change. So I would suggest several things to think about as we go through this process. Number one, it really is important to restore the authority of the SEC to conduct rate reviews. The rate freeze bill disrupted that, and the only way to get it back on track is to give that SEC some authority. Secondly, the utilities are going to have to modernize the grid, and there are grid modernization provisions in this bill. Good thing. But we need to make sure that as that modernization occurs, public scrutiny is involved and oversight is involved. That happens through the SEC. And finally, I hope that we will continue to push to transform the energy economy. There are some things in the bills that we've seen that are productive first steps, but for some of us, they don't go far enough. Just take offshore wind, for example. When the developer of the pilot program in Virginia did a project off the shores of the United Kingdom for 2,000 megawatts, which is less than the cap right now in this bill, that project created 1,600 jobs per year, 500 full-time jobs. It created a supply chain that created many more jobs, and it brought Siemens to that area of the United Kingdom with billions of dollars of capital investment. In Virginia, we have a port that's second to none. We have the ability to do some unbelievable things with wind power, but we can't have a cap on it. We have to explode that cap or raise it to a megawatt number that makes sense. We can't miss this opportunity to send the market signals that matter, and market signals matter. So in conclusion, please read the letters that have gone back and forth. If you don't have them, come to me or see Delegate Ware, Delegate Keene, Delegate Landis is on the letter, Delegate Weber is there, Delegate Ward. And let's push for consumers, let's push for SEC oversight, and let's push to send those market signals to create that new energy economy in Virginia. This is our best shot for a decade. I hope we'll take it. Thank you.